You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play, to lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you.
I think I would just cut the wire.
Greetings, fellow mortals. Just a reminder saying it's just my opinion is for cowards. I want you to take a moment and think about what is the single best scene in the entire MCU. Now I want you to take your opinion and throw it away because you're wrong, because the best scene in the entire MCU comes from the first Captain America movie. And it actually happens before Steve even becomes a super soldier. During basic training, Steve's commander wants to prove a point, so he takes a dud grenade and throws it into the middle of the trainees. However, all of the trainees think that there's a live bomb in the middle of them, and almost all of them scramble away for cover, except for Steve, who jumps on top of the grenade, sacrificing himself for everyone else. And while there wasn't actually an explosion, everyone is absolutely floored by the fact that Steve was willing to do that. And it wasn't just the fact that he was willing to do it, it was how quickly he was willing to do it. He jumped on that grenade instantly, and that is the moment where he became Captain America, even before he became a super soldier. Steve changed a bunch of minds that day, not just with his commander, but also with Peggy, who went from looking at him as just a friend as to something more, with some of the best facial acting that you'll ever see for just a split second. This trope is known as the heroic sacrifice, where a character is willing to give up their life for the sake of other people. And the reason I think this is the best scene in the entire MCU is because it perfectly established Steve's character throughout the entirety of the 10-year series of movies. People often talk about how good the original Iron Man is, but they also need to remember how good the original Captain America movie was. If Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor didn't work out, there wouldn't have been an entire movie series afterward. Unlike his contemporaries, Captain America is a more static character. He really doesn't develop all with his thought process and his morals. That's not to say that he doesn't change at all or his relationships doesn't change at all. It's to say that if you asked his opinion at the start of the MCU on a topic and then asked him the same question at the end with his last appearance, he'd probably give you a very similar, if not the same, answer. He became the emotional and moral anchor of the Avengers, and that wouldn't have happened if the writers didn't establish who he was at the very start with that grenade scene. A lot of writers and directors came and went up until Endgame, and the reason that Steve remained so consistent was because he was established so well at the start. There wasn't a single person in creative control that could deviate from his character because of that grenade scene. That's how important it was. The heroic sacrifice is a tool used to show that a character is completely good, and the fact that they are willing to give their life for a group of people or for a cause that they believe in. When a writer is creating such a scene, they want it to be an emotional climax, something that you feel, something that you remember for a long time. Just look at Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings. Who has not quoted with their friends, "You shall not pass"? From the very start, you know that Gandalf is a good human being. He's friendly, he's moral, and he's very wise. He understands the danger of the ring and knows that he will give into temptation, so he doesn't even want to get close to it. But the scene where he is willing to face down a fiery monster for his friends at the possible expense of his own life reveals who he really is. The fact that we all know that he would do it for his friends even if they weren't on the mission for the ring proves just how of a good person this is, that he is a hero.
You see, in their last moments, people show you who they really are.
Who's the photographer who takes the pictures of Spider-Man?
I don't know who he is. His stuff comes in the mail.
You're lying!
And this isn't the only memorable line of someone sacrificing themselves for someone else. I volunteer as tribute. It's probably a line that you've heard a lot jokingly throughout your life. Now, I have my own criticisms of the Hunger Games, especially in the later half of the series, but there's no denying the effectiveness of this scene. There's a reason why you remember it. Generally speaking, all of the scenes and quotes that you remember from movies, from television shows, from games, and from books, all are because they're either really good or really, really bad. But even people that don't like the Hunger Games will admit that this scene is very effective, where Katniss decides to sacrifice herself, theoretically, for her sister, because she's not likely to come out of the Hunger Games alive. This shows exactly who the protagonist is. Not only that, it's a little bit more impressive because it's not just in the heat of the moment. While Katniss doesn't have all the time in the world, it's not exactly the same as a grenade about to go off or a fiery demon attacking you. There was a delay, the consequences wouldn't be immediate. Katniss had to be more calculating. She had to decide that her sister's life was more important than her own. She had to think and dwell on the consequences of her decision. It wasn't just pure instinct, which isn't to say that she's better than the previous examples. It's just to say that it's a different twist on the formula.
Just stick with me, kid. I know this town like the back of my hand. Hey, that's new.
In My Hero Academia, it's established very early on that a hero is someone that moves on reflex, that they are willing to jump into danger for someone else without even thinking. And that's very true. If someone moves without thinking on reflex, saving someone else at the expense of themselves, that's very heroic. But there's also something to be said about being calculated, about a long wait, about having multiple opportunities to get off the train and save yourself. Out of a bunch of long-standing series, Harry Potter is one of the few endings that isn't really criticized all that much, besides the shipping. But guess what? Shippers are going to argue no matter what happens. At the very end, and spoilers for anyone who hasn't read the books or watched the movies at this point, Harry learns that he has a Horcrux in his head, meaning that Voldemort can't die as long as Harry is alive. Harry has to take a long walk through Hogwarts, talking with multiple different people, including his best friends and the dead, all so that he can confront Voldemort and die by his hands. Harry didn't know that he would live through the experience. He had to knowingly sacrifice himself and dwell on the fact that he was going to die for close to an hour before it actually happened. And he had the means to escape, but he didn't try that at all because he wanted to give his friends a chance to live.
This is heavy.
There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
Once again, every character that I brought up so far would probably do the exact same thing, but there is a bit of a difference between moving on instinct and having to dwell on the fact that you're going to sacrifice yourself. I mean, one of the biggest religions in the world follows this exact same concept, where Jesus lived 30 years just so that he could die for everyone else. It's a very intense and thought-provoking concept. And now you might be thinking, wait a minute, did J.K. Rowling rip off the story of Jesus? And I would say, yes, she did.
Hey, you know who lives in this house? A great big phony!
But now you might be thinking, hey, love of storytelling. All of these examples that you've given with Captain America, with Gandalf, with Katniss, with Harry Potter, they all lived through their experience. Yes, they did. With those examples, the point of the heroic sacrifice wasn't for them to actually die, but to demonstrate their character. I can sit here and name plenty of different examples of characters doing heroic sacrifices and living somehow. But what about stories where characters do heroic sacrifices and have to live with the consequences? Or, in this case, not live with the consequences.
Oh, I made myself sad.
In The Exorcist, and spoilers by the way, for a really old film that you should really have seen by now, Father Karras sacrifices himself to slay a demon. He allows the demon to remove the protection from around his neck and possess him, and in his last moments of consciousness, he throws himself out of his window so that he could take the demon down with him. And he didn't do it just for one little girl's life. Although Regan was part of the equation, he also considered everyone who would have suffered after the events of the film.
The needs of the many outweigh
the needs of the few.
or the one.
And he didn't miraculously survive like Batman carrying a bomb over the bay. Not to say that characters surviving a heroic sacrifice is always bad. It's not. It can be a good thing. It demonstrates character. But in the case of this story, it needed to happen this way. It would have completely taken away from the ending if Father Karras survived. Considering the genre, the themes, and the demon itself, it would have made no sense if no one had to suffer the consequences of the possession. And his death meant something, at least until the latest film where they completely dismissed it as a nothing burger.
My opinion, because I'm not a member of the damn patriarchy.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
If a heroic sacrifice is played straight, the death has to mean something. Just look at Vinland Saga. At the very beginning of the series, the main character, Thorfinn's father, Thor's, yes, I know the names are terrible, but the Japanese creator of the series is trying to be true to the names of Viking culture, so he really didn't have a whole lot of choice. They used Thor a lot. But anyway, at the very start of the series, Thor faces a decision. He can fight against an ambush, or he can sacrifice himself. Now, it's established that if he fights, he would in fact win. In fact, he would beat all of his enemies without even killing them. But his enemies would not have the same level of kindness. They would slaughter his allies and his son. So he allows his attackers to kill him in order to save his allies. This event and Thor's final words to Thorfinn drive the entire series. Thorfinn is literally obsessed with it, and even in the later half of the series, he's still driven by those memories, just in a different way.
I have no enemies at all.
And in some ways, Thor's death is a heroic sacrifice meant to redeem him, because he lives with the guilt of all the different people that he slaughtered throughout his lifetime. He did so in battle, but still he feels the guilt of it. And that leads to an extension of this trope, a heroic sacrifice in order to redeem an evil character. Or at the very least to redeem a character who has done terrible things in the past, like Yondu from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. And spoilers for this film, by the way. At the very end, Yondu sacrifices himself so that Peter can live.
First, let's get one thing straight. I'm not crying. I'm just sweating through my eyes.
His sacrifice puts everything into perspective. Yondu is in fact a very flawed being, but at the same time he does love Peter like a son. He's just terrible at showing it. Or you could even look at something like Darth Vader. At the very end, he sacrificed himself for Luke, redeeming himself in the eyes of the Force. Maybe not in my eyes though. I mean, he did in fact slaughter younglings in episode 3. I'm just saying. To me, there are different layers to this, and there are some things you can't really come back from in my mind. Yondu was a complete jerk to Peter, but also, guess what? He didn't slaughter children, so there you go. That's my proof that Guardians of the Galaxy is better than Star Wars.
You want a piece of me? Cause I'm pretty sick of your goddamn mouth!
What do you want to do, huh? What do you want to do?
Another example would be Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z. In the Buu saga, he sacrificed himself in order to take down the greatest threat the world has ever seen, all the while having a surprisingly loving moment with his son, demonstrating that he has in fact changed over the series, even though he has done terrible actions. Personally, I don't know if it makes up for the fact that he conquered and slaughtered many different civilizations, but to be fair, the series itself establishes that it wouldn't make him go to heaven if he died.
It's not that simple. I think I've got enough to go on here. Okay,
wait, you
well...
don't understand.
That's another satisfied customer.
And later in the series, when he came back to life, because it's Dragon Ball, and of course he came back to life, it is shown that he has changed and he's become a better person. It was all about his character development, because in the end, it actually turned out that his sacrifice was for nothing because the enemy Buu survived his attack.
Well, that was pointless.
Yep, there's a twist on the heroic sacrifice. Sometimes it's all in vain. There was no point to the character dying at all. If you want a really good example of this, look at Wander over Yonder. There's an episode where one of Lord Dominator's robots becomes friends with Wander. And Wander's kindness is so great that the bot is willing to betray its owner and creator and hide a specific planet from Lord Dominator so that she cannot destroy it. And then the robot had a very sad death scene, but it was all for nothing because Dominator eventually found that planet as established in the series finale, where she destroyed basically everything but the secret planet that no one knew about until the very last moment. So besides development for a one-off character, there really wasn't any point to it, unless you consider maybe the fact that the robot bought more time for the people on the planet to escape. But considering that evacuation was shown to be very quick in this series, it was probably completely pointless.
This is worthless.
It's less than worthless, my boy.
But if you want the single most pointless sacrifice in the history of fiction, you should probably look at Asura's Wrath. The other generals in the game slaughtered the Emperor, killed Asura's wife, kidnapped Asura's daughter to use as an energy source, and then killed Asura himself. Also, they could kill trillions of innocent people over thousands of years to gather their life energy to use as a giant weapon against their enemy. And then they used said energy against a repeatedly resurrected Asura, only to find out that, hey, his power is stronger than theirs by far. And then at the very end, everything that they sacrificed, everything that they did was proven to be completely pointless.
Man, you are one pathetic loser. No offense.
But even then, it's not even close to the funniest, most pointless heroic sacrifice I've ever seen. Kong Skull Island. And yeah, you probably know where I'm going with this. And for the record, I don't know this character's name and I'm not going to look it up. But I remember it by heart, seeing it in the theater where this guy took a grenade, pulled the pin, and then walked towards this giant monster. Now, he obviously intended to be eaten by the monster and then blow the creature up from the inside, but instead of eating him, the giant monster swatted him away like a fly towards the nearest mountain, where he smashed into the cliffs and then exploded uselessly against the rocks. And I was laughing so hard that people were starting to glare at me. You see, this is why I can't see a whole lot of movies in theaters, because when terrible things happen, or when bad writing happens, or in this case it might be intentionally horrific things happen, I just laugh. And don't take this as a criticism of Skull Island, because that was so funny and so intentional, and I love it. I just think that people around me were sad about the pointlessness of the heroic sacrifice, but I was just amused because I knew what the writers were doing.
I do not understand.
I do. I understood that reference.
But if you want the king of heroic sacrifices in fiction, you need to look at Attack on Titan. If someone shows up that is obviously not the main character, I can assure you that there is a solid 90% chance that that character is going to do a heroic sacrifice. And then there is a 50% chance that their heroic sacrifice was completely pointless and didn't even buy the other characters any time whatsoever. Not only that, a vast majority of characters who do a heroic sacrifice, which is necessary, instantly regret their decisions when they're being eaten alive by giant monsters. There are almost chapter-long monologues about how they were so stupid for doing this before they blink out of existence. It's both hilarious and really sad, depending on which lens you're looking at with the series. Because in the world of Attack on Titan, sacrificing yourself is considered the greatest virtue in the world. But in the end, it was all pointless, because every single sacrifice ever made in that series led to the worst ending I've ever seen. But love of storytelling, it was symbolic. No, if you have to use "it's symbolic" to explain away a bad ending, it is a bad ending.
Oh, have you not heard? It was my understanding that everyone had heard.
Heard what?
Brian, don't!
Oh, well, a bird, bird, bird. A bird, well, a bird, bird, bird.
And then there is the Yu-Gi-Oh example, but not in the way that you think. It doesn't have to do with a storyline, it has to do with the creator himself. In July of 2022, Kazuki Takahashi died trying to save 3 other people from drowning. That's right, the guy who created the card game was actually a hero all along that was willing to sacrifice himself for others. In addition, on May of 2020, a pro wrestler named Shad Gaspard died prioritizing his son's life over his own while they were both drowning. In January of 2014, Aziz Hassan stopped a bomber from entering his school. He grabbed the attacker in a bear hug, forcing the other person to detonate the explosives, killing them both. but his actions saved hundreds of innocent lives. From the most famous celebrities to people you've never even heard of, there are many different people capable of these heroic sacrifices.
That the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day.
While doing research for this video, I found many different real life instances of people giving their life so that other people could live. To my relief, it's not just a trope, it's something that can happen in real life. There is good in the world. I could sit here making an hour-long video with a list of people who did heroic sacrifices during 9/11 alone. Even at everyone's most cynical point, everyone can agree that these heroic sacrifices mean something. In a lot of ways, storytelling and writing is telling a complicated lie in order to find a fundamental truth. In fiction, with the power of an all-knowing narrator, it's very easy to tell whether or not a sacrifice meant or anything, or in hindsight, whether or not someone sacrificed their lives actually accomplished anything. But that's not important. The fact that there are people out there that actually value other human beings so much is moving to me. The fact that this trope, both in fiction and in reality, is held in high regard means a lot. There are heroes all around us, we just gotta be open to it. But what do you think about this trope and concept? Please leave a comment down below, and make sure to tell me an example that I might have missed with both fiction and reality of heroic sacrifice that means a lot to you. And remember, if you disagree with everything I have to say, that is perfectly fine. After all, everyone's entitled to their objectively wrong opinion.
Nice and easy to go down. Slower, gently.
Thank you all so much for watching.
You're still here?
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. You bye. Boom.
Do not despair.